Sherlock Holmes, the world's greatest detective. He is a staple of literature and has managed to remain in our pop culture for over 136 years. Created by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle in 1887, it isn't surprising that Holmes became one of the first characters adapted to screen. Even today, we are still making films about him, whether that be in his natural Victorian times or brought into our modern day, making him arguably one of the most prolific fictional characters of all time. The very first Sherlock Holmes film, titled Sherlock Holmes Baffled, came out all the way back in 1903, though some have contested that it was only registered that year and was actually in circulation as early as April of 1900. The film was made by experimental cinematographer Arthur Marvin, who later went on to become one of the cameramen on a lot of D.W. Griffith's earliest movies. At only 30 seconds long, Sherlock Holmes Baffled isn't exactly what I would call the most loyal of adaptations. It shows Sherlock Holmes arriving home as his house is being robbed, and when he confronts the burglar, he disappears, only to then later reappear. Just kind of out of thin air. When Sherlock tries to recover his stolen goods, the bag vanishes from his hands into the thief's, who then promptly jumps out the window and escapes. Holmes doesn't even really get to catch his man in his first film, or solve any sort of mystery, or, now that I think of it, really have anything approaching a coherent narrative. This movie likely was just using the recognizable name brand because it basically has nothing to do with the actual character. This is what we call a trick film, a movie meant to showcase creative editing techniques or special effects to wow the audience. It's a style of film that director George Méliès became famous for, and at this point, Méliès already had a massive library, and most of his films were all significantly more impressive than any of the effects found here. But let's fast forward to 1905, with Vitagraph Studios' Adventure of Sherlock Holmes. This was the first serious attempt at bringing the character to life by loosely adapting one of the books, The Sign of Four. This movie only exists as fragments in the Library of Congress, and no copies are available to view. So unfortunately, I can't really be covering it here because, they haven't, let me in. In 1910, Lupin contra Sherlock Holmes was released featuring a crossover of the gentleman thief Lupin and the legendary detective. This is often considered one of the first, if not the first, big crossover between two major characters. In 1914, stage actor and early mentor to Charlie Chaplin, Harry Arthur Saintsbury, would portray the character in two short films, A Study in Scarlet and The Valley of Fear. Both movies are now, unfortunately, lost to time. Most of these early films really did struggle with bringing the character to life. This is often due to the silent medium not being great for the translation of Arthur Conan Doyle's narrative style. Without the ability to give Holmes his sharp wit or inquisitive dialogue from the books, it is often hard to translate just that sense of mystery or capture just the spirit of these novels. As a result, many of these films were not really loyal to their source and resorted to almost making Holmes more of an action star, as that physicality was much easier to get across in the silent medium. And that's not to say we don't sometimes still portray him as an action hero. Guy Ritchie's Robert Downey Jr.-led effort likewise leaned much more heavily into the action-adventure side of things than it did, a plotting mystery. But I think it was in 1916 that we perhaps got the first truly successful attempt to bring Sherlock Holmes to the screen, with the very simply titled Sherlock Holmes. The movie was an American production from S&A Studios out of Chicago and directed by Arthur Berthollet. This movie was actually another film believed to have been lost until as late as 2014, when a copy was discovered in France. The movie was based on an 1899 stage play of the same name, and even brought in the original playwright and performer, William Gillette, to reprise the main role. Now, this would be a very, very different performance for Gillette because he would be stripped of any dialogue and forced to rely on well-timed intertitles. And it is a tough balancing act to put in enough text to keep the story just flowing, but not so much that it turns the film into a novel. Though the film was released in 1916, it would actually gain popularity while doing the rounds in 1920, after the end of World War I, when movies started to return to European cinemas, and Sherlock Holmes became a popular screening. Many even credit it for solidifying the character design that we all associate with the character, such as the deerstalker cap. But the movie doesn't really adapt any one book, and instead is an original story developed by Gillette, taking elements from various sources. The story centers around a young woman named Alice Faulkner, who inherits incriminating letters from her sister's lover, a European prince. Unfortunately, due to the fact that, apartments had paper-thin walls back in the 1910s, her next-door neighbors, the Larrabees, overhear of the existence of these letters and plot to steal them in order to blackmail the prince. They trick Alice into coming to their house and then try to figure out where she's hiding the documents. Meanwhile, the prince and British officials hire Sherlock Holmes to recover the missing letters. He traces them back to the Larrabee's house, where he ends up meeting and falling in love with Alice very quickly. Out of compassion, he decides to leave her there, with the letters and in the hands of people that he knows are villains. I don't know. It's not exactly the most romantic of gestures. Feeling backed into a corner, the Larrabees end up turning to Holmes' arch-nemesis Professor Moriarty for help. From here, you get very little detectiving. Most of the plot I just mentioned exists only as a framing device in order to provide a staging ground for Holmes and Moriarty to engage in a battle of wits. And fortunately, this version of Moriarty doesn't really come off as some sort of mad genius. His plots all seem pretty basic and transparent, and he's easily bamboozled. One such attempt is him planning to shoot Holmes, and then Holmes easily just removing all the bullets out of his gun when he's not looking. So, good job there. And so watching Sherlock Holmes outsmart him, it's not really all that satisfying in this movie. And without a good mystery to ground the story, it sort of is just left as a series of disjointed conflicts between the two geniuses and lacks the heart of what draws people to these stories in the first place. Gillette does a good job in the role, having made the jump from stage to screen, but he's very limited by the lack of audio. So much of this character is grounded in his cadence, examination of witnesses, and just outright wit. All of this gets lost in the title cards, which are far too sparse, especially for a film that is way too loyal to its stage counterpart and doesn't make necessary changes for this new medium. Yet credit does have to be given for Gillette's role in developing a lot of the classic visual traits of Sherlock, and it really does help him feel like the first fully formed version of this character. And the rest of the cast does a serviceable enough job, even if they aren't particularly memorable. Moriarty just kind of has this fixed scowl on his face all the time, and Watson is just sort of there to be repeatedly beat up, or just make, I guess, stupid choices in order to make Holmes look smarter by comparison. So, sorry Watson, you got thrown underneath the bus. It's a bummer. Life's a bummer. And the love interest Alice is just sort of there to look cute and withhold the necessary plot devices and information to kind of frustratingly keep things moving along. The movie ends on a pretty anticlimactic note. We basically have a Deus Ex Machina where Holmes only beats Moriarty because a convenient newspaper boy tells him about the professor's just pathetic disguise. Moriarty is then easily apprehended by the police. Now, I'm not going to say that this was the most engaging battle of wits to begin with, but this does end on a particularly, just lazy, sour note. The movie closes out with Sherlock tricking Alice into handing over the letters by feigning some sort of declaration of being called a swindler, or society has declared him a swindler, or something like that. Anyways, he gets the letters. It's a strategy that's appropriately dickish for certain versions of the character, but it does make this more romanticized version just feel kind of dishonest. But you can't end it on a note like that. You gotta have your happy ending. So Alice instantly and head-scratchingly forgives him just before the credits get to roll. So I guess, congratulations, Sherlock. You did it. But in the end, it is held back by its loyalty to the stage play and trying to make a direct translation to film without really compensating enough for the loss of dialogue. Even the cinematography was very, very stagey for that time, with fixed cameras and editors who refused close-ups in favor of constant wide frames. It's a clunky film that doesn't really succeed in capturing the spirit of mystery and discovery in the source material, but it's Gillette's intimate closeness with the material and this character of Sherlock that helps him feel fully formed and easily recognizable as the character that is still around today. And that, after 100 years, that's worth something. But this is not the end of the line for Sherlock Holmes, and he will have many, many more adventures over the years. We are sure to cover some of those in the future, so be sure to like and subscribe, and we will see you then. Keep those reels turning. Thank you.